Yeah, please go ahead.
We are really sorry. There's a technical end on the part of speaker one. She must be joining any moment. She was here. She just left because of some technical.
All right.
So she's here now. We'll be starting now. Thank you. Sorry for the delay.
We'd like to humbly apologize to the judges for this delay. There seems to be some connectivity issues. As soon as the participant joins, we'll begin with the round. We sincerely apologize for this delay.
All I can say is that this is preparing you for real court.
Apart from learning the law, we also have to learn the technology now. Yeah, but connectivity is not in our hands.
As Dhananjay would confirm, this also happens in real court. only difference is there they will pass over the mat.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but then I thought it will not be in favor of the teams here to pass over. But if I can ask the applicant team, if you are splitting the issue, should we start with one of the issues which the other speaker is not here for? Are you splitting the issues among yourself?
Yes, Your Lordship, we'll be splitting the issue, so I can start if the bench permits.
Yeah, sure.
Good afternoon to the honorable members of the bench. This is the counsel appearing on behalf of the resolution professional, and I'll be addressing the issue of preferential transaction and the consolidation, while my co-counsel will be addressing the issue of fraudulent transaction. The CIRP of FTSL is maintainable, and that the CIRP of personal guarantor is not maintainable in this court. May the counsel proceed with the arguments? Much obliged. Your Lordship and Your Ladyship, it is humbly submitted before this honourable court that the impugned settlement transaction entered with FIL, SPL in order to repay for the par purchase agreement is a preferential transaction, and therefore shall be annulled. Your Lordship and Your Ladyship, walking through the section 43, subsection 2, it specifically lays down 4 prerequisites for a transaction to be qualified as a preferential transaction. Them being, first, there has to be a transfer of a property or an interest. Second, that there shall be an antecedent debt. Third, that it should put the creditor in a beneficial position with respect to section 53. And fourth, that is that the transaction should happen within the relevant time period. Moving on to the first prerequisite, that is there shall be a transfer of an interest. Your Lordship and Your Ladyship, it is submitted that FIL transferred its interest on intercorporate deposits in favor of SPL. Thus, this requirement is duly met. Second, that there shall be an antecedent debt. Then the par purchase agreement entered with SPL back in 2018 is the antecedent debt. Third, that is that it should put the creditor in a beneficial position with regard to section 53. Your Lordship and Your Ladyship, it is most humbly submitted that SPL is an operational creditor. It's very evident, operational creditor, as the debt that has been talked about in the transaction is arising out of the acts operations of the debtor, and consequently debt being in the provision is a debt being arising out of the provisions of goods and services. It's an operational debt, and it's a settled law that financial creditors enjoy priority over operational creditors, as also held in the case of Swiss Ribbons versus Union of India. Does a complete flat out payment without any haircut to one operational creditor at the cost and exclusion of all the other financial creditors, which in the present case were 12 financial creditors with total debt owing to more than 43,000 crores. So in this instant case, this leads to a beneficial position for SPL, because had the waterfall mechanism as laid down under section 53 of the code been followed, this wouldn't have been possible.
Counsel, let me stop you. 2 questions that I have.
Indeed, Your Lordship.
43, as you were mentioning, requires a transfer.
Indeed.
How is this a transfer? Can you elaborate on that? How is this a transfer? Because if you look at the definition, how is this a transfer? That is one question. Second question is, have you concluded that there was an intent to prefer? And if there was an intent, how have you come to this conclusion? This is the facts that we have.
Indeed. Your Lordship, answering the first question, referring to section 327, where the definition of a property and interest separately, under 327, where this property is given, and under interest, under 321, if the counsel is not wrong. Your Lordship, the transfer of interest is such that this money that was being paid, that is 400 crores out of ICD, was meant to be in the favor of, was an asset of FIL in the first place. So it was
counsel.
Yes.
1 second. Address me on 34. This is 31. Go down.
Indeed. 34.
Yes.
If the researcher may transfer.
Yes. So what is the nature of What is the nature of transaction here between FIL and SPL?
Your Lordship, this being an assignment cum settlements agreement, this can clearly fall within, because it's an assignment. So here it's an assignment of the debt, and it's a sale. So therefore, the sale. Sorry.
Is an assignment a sale?
Your Lordship, the counsel couldn't get you.
Sorry, is an assignment a sale? My question is, how is this covered in 34? So it is sale.
Your Lordship,
yeah.
Your Lordship, because in a way they have sold their assets. It was their asset. ICD was an asset to FIL, and they sold their asset in a way to sell their asset to an operational creditor, that is SPL. So that is the reason why it's a transfer.
What is a sale for this purpose? Counsel?
Yeah, Counsel, I think what my learned brother is trying to ask you is that this transfer definition does not include the word assignment. So don't you think that there is a specific omission to, they have deliberately not included the term assignment?
Your ladyship, even if they have not included the term assignment, but there are other two terms. First, there's a transfer of right. So here there's a transfer of right as to the right on the interest, the right on the money that they were getting. That is 400 crores in the instant case that they were getting from ICD, intercorporate deposits. That was their asset, FIL's asset. Now they have transferred the right to that asset to their one of the operational creditors. So this is what the transfer in the current scenario, what the council meant.
Okay.
If the bench is yes, your lordship.
Proceed to the next question. The second question was, how is this? What is the intent to prefer here?
Your lordship, first, the council, before answering the question, would just cite up just a law that if the bench may refer to 43 subsection 2, there's a clear line stated that the transfer, a corporate debtor is deemed to have given preference. The corporate debtor is deemed to have given preference. So this term deemed preference is clearly highlighting the fact that the burden of proof to prove otherwise, that the transaction is not preferential, is on the respondents and not on the resolution professional, who is itself an officer of the court. Secondly, your lordship, now answering as the learned lordship has asked, so our counsel will answer it brief. Your lordship, this is not in the ordinary course, and if this is the question, if the counsel is getting the question wrong, then your lordship may repeat, please. This is the question, right? That it's how is it how is the intent wrong and how is it not in the ordinary course?
No, ordinary course is the defense. I'm asking you whether how you have come to. If you look at 43(1), you as a resolution professional are supposed to arrive at an opinion that a preference was given, and then there is a deeming fiction under 43(2). Now,
got your point, your lord. Yes.
So what? How have you arrived at this opinion? Is there an intent on the part of FIL here, or there is?
Sorry. Yes, your lordship.
Go on.
Go on. May the council speak now? Yes. Your lordship, the council would here state 4 facts on the basis of which the RP has come to this conclusion. First and the foremost, that they entered into this agreement 3 months prior the CIRP was initiated, was commenced, and that too without the approval of the Joint Lenders Forum. So first, and this is the point. Second, that they didn't pay it themselves. It's not like that they had this money in their banks and now they have assigned it to or they have transferred it to the SPL directly. They did this by the way of their subsidiaries. They took their money, they took that money from their subsidiaries and directly sent it to the SPL. That is an operational creditor. Furthermore, what is important to note here, your lordship and your ladyship, is the point that these people they did it through an assignment cum settled transaction. It's not like a normal bank transfer. It's not even like that, and they are doing it within a day span of day. Which assignment cum settlement? If you look about these agreements, we talk about these agreements. They are laborious tasks. They take a lot of people drafting the agreements and everything, and they did
Counsel, are you saying that because it is assignment cum settlement and the money was actually paid, therefore it is preferential?
Indeed not, your ladyship. These are the secondary factors. The primary factors would always be that they did it 3 months prior to the CIRP just to siphon off the funds.
That is 11 months prior to it, then?
Even then, your ladyship, it would fall within the relevant time frame, because in the present case, it's just 3 months. They have did it just 3 months, and as per the law, it's the 1 year look back period for the parties other than related parties 1 year, and that for the related parties 2 years. So even in that case, it will be a preferential transaction.
But why is it not an ordinary course transaction? Isn't this PPA a very critical asset for the company? If they had terminated the PPA, then what could have happened? I would assume that they must be saying that they'll terminate the PPA, so they had no option but to give this money to them. So had it not been a settlement, and if they had directly paid them, then you would have said it's a preference.
Your Ladyship, the Council very well understands the concern. However, the Council begs to differ because this is not the case, because power purchase agreement in the present case was entered 2 years back. Sorry, this is not the point. The point is, Your Ladyship, that the fiduciary duty that the directors owe during the financial distress of a company is not to the shareholders at that time or the managing of the operation, but it is towards the creditors. So this is very important to keep in mind. The company is amounting under the debt of 43,000 crores. And at this
Council, if the company is under so much tremendous stress, wouldn't it be critical to keep the company as a going concern at that time and to actually honor these critical contracts? How can you say that a payment under a contract, which is so critical, is a preference?
Your Ladyship, the surrounding situation makes it even worse. In 2020, the demand for gas and oil was so low that government was not even asking any of the private refineries to come and give them oil. They were solely dependent on the government refineries. There was no need, there was no chance that even if they ran their operations, the people would, the government would come and ask for their oil. Their demand was very low. There was no need, because in that particular situation, if they're maintaining the operations, they are even creating more of a liability instead of an asset. They are paying off, and in the current situation, they are paid off 400 crores of an asset, Your Ladyship, to a operational creditors, and that to a full flat-out payment, totally putting them in a beneficial position. Your Ladyship, that will be all.
So the Council, that entire demand situation happened much later. The PPA was signed in September of 2018, and since then no payments have been made, and then it was considered appropriate. And I want to bring up the point about directors. You are moving against the director, or you're moving against the company? Who are you moving against? Who are you seeking relief against?
Your Lordship, we are seeking relief as to that the settlement should be annulled and the money should be given back to the FIL assets, because right now right now the resolution professional is looking out for the company. It want company as to the creditors, looking out for the creditors. And due to the paucity of time, the Council would just briefly answer the first question. That is, Your Lordship, even if it was entered 2 years back, there was breach right after the first year. They were supposed to pay 200 crores right after the first year, and they failed to do so. If Your Lordship is satisfied, may the Council proceed with the next argument. Next issue. Much obliged. Your Lordship and Your Ladyship, it is submitted that consolidation of that the CIRP of FIL, FTSL, and FGE shall be consolidated.
Where is the CIRP of FTSL, Council?
Your Lordship, the Council didn't get the question.
Where is the CIRP of FTSL? Has it commenced?
Your Lordship, the co-council would be addressing the same issue as I was to address it later on. So
no, I'm asking you a different question. You are saying it shall be consolidated. Is there a CIRP existing today? Whether it should be admitted is a separate issue. I'm on the merits of your consolidation argument.
Indeed.
On what basis have you come to court? Has the CIRP commenced?
Your Lordship, as the co-council would be addressing this first, and then even if the council here has come to seek for relief and ask for consolidation of FGE, and have FGE. Like, this is the procedural flaw. This is a procedural flaw for right now. But then later on, once the CIRP is established, is accepted and it's maintained, then the consolidation would occur. And in order to save the time of the court, both of the councils are pleading today itself together, because it's otherwise.
Okay, so now come to FGE. What right do I have to pass an order in respect of FGE?
Indeed. Your Lordship, talking about the jurisdiction or the power of the NCLT, Your Lordship, it is submitted that NCLT is the court of equity. As also
NCLT is a court of equity. I thought that in case Shashidhar and all, they didn't say NCLT is a court of equity. Equity extends to non-residents also?
Are we a court, council, to start with?
Your Lordship, the council didn't get the question.
Are we a court? You called us a court. Are we a court?
Sorry, a tribunal. It's a court in a sense, Your Lordship, that bankruptcy courts or the bankruptcy tribunals have been given the status of courts of equity as also held in the case of Videocon, which is an LCLT Mumbai judgment, which ordered for consolidation, which gave an order in favor of consolidation itself.
Is that binding on us, counsel?
Indeed, not, your lordship. It has a persuasive value. That's it.
No, but counsel, please explain to me. I'm unable to understand this FGE company that you're talking about. It seems to be some other sister concern in, I think it's in London. How can I catch companies in different jurisdictions, promoters, other companies all over the world? How can I order their CIRP? It is already undergoing CIRP under UK law.
Your ladyship, if the council may. Your lordship, there are three. Your ladyship, there are three arguments for the same. First, that the there is a single center of decision making for all these three companies, that is FGE, FTSL, and FIL, and it is the promoter family controlling the entire operations from one place, that is New Delhi. So the single center of decision making is New Delhi and not London or any other place. It's only and only New Delhi, and this promoter family. The members of this family are directors of all these companies. Mr. Rishabh Dev is director of FTSL.
Counsel, are you saying that wherever promoter resides, the CIRP should start there?
Indeed not, your ladyship. However, if we apply the nervous test as held in the Hartscock versus Friends, so the place of central administration is of relevance. And also another point being that these companies are, your lordship and your ladyship, they're very interdependent companies, economically very interdependent. If we even look at the facts of the case, your ladyship and your lordship, these companies were able to procure large amount of credits only and only because of the fact that these are part of the Fortuna Group, which is one of the biggest conglomerate of India. And that was the reason. It was only because of the goodwill of this common brand name that they were even able to get this price in the first place. And if now they are not consolidated, it would be really unjust to their creditors who have given them money on the basis of this goodwill. And also they have been working as a single economic entity.
Unjust to whose creditors?
To FGs and FTSLs and FILs, or to all of them, because they have been working together. They have been considering this company as a single economic entity, because they have been working like that in the market since their incorporation, your ladyship. Here the council would like to cite the case of Vodafone International Holdings versus Union of India, when it was clearly laid that the decisive test is the steering interlinkage between these companies, where the promoter family controls the operation of the subsidiary to the extent that they don't even have
I am more on the FGE. Indeed. How is FGE is not a subsidiary of FIL, from what I understand, right?
Indeed, but it is an associate company. Your ladyship, you're not audible.
I don't have FGE, right? I don't care about them. There are some non-resident parties. Why are lenders of FIL so interested in FGE?
Your ladyship, because of the here to substantiate my argument, your ladyship, the council requests to refer to page 5 of the moot proposition, where moot 5 of the for the sake of convenience, my researcher would be sharing a screen as well and displaying the moot page 5 of the moot proposition, wherein it is clearly stated that FILs, even when the FILs further future capability were being considered, they considered the financial status of the group as a whole. So that is the reason. There's some technical error, I think. So if the bench may refer to their own moot propositions on page 5 in the last 2-3 lines, your ladyship. It's on the screen now, your ladyship and your lordship. It's here on the screen. It's marked since it had to assess its financials and the group financials to check if FTSL would be able to fund massive. So here it's very evident that even FIL lenders are relying on the assets of the FGE as well. Because if we look at it, your ladyship, the only asset that this FTSL has is right to spectrum. And they have been working as interlinkage companies. That is why the council is saying that these are a single economic entity.
Council, what's the usage of a spectrum to a retail company? What is the interlinkage there? FG is a retail company.
Indeed, your lordship, there is no direct use for it. However, that is the council. What the council is trying to establish is their interdependence on each other. FIL depends on the goodwill of the group. Because if we look at FTSL, it has the second largest user base in the country. So this gives the FGE as a popularity factor, that it is known, it's a part of a known company. Because if we talk about today, if we talk about Reliance or other companies which are very famous, which are famous in the country, that every other person uses their products either by the way of Geo or by the way of phone, by the way of telecom sector or by the way of clothes or anything for that matter. So this common brand name is of value here. If the account, sorry. No, you may continue.
The organizing committee, is the time up now?
The council seeks extension for 2 minutes. The council has almost done with their arguments, just 2 minutes.
Apologies for the delay, but yes, the time for speaker 2 is up and 5 minutes have been exceeded, but an extension may be granted if the judges consider so.
Okay, proceed. Let's wrap up in 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Need your lordship. Due to paucity of time, the council would just keep all the points very crisp. First, if the question that might be raised by the honourable by the learned opposing counsel, that the court may not have jurisdiction, so for that, the council would state the principle of comity, that it's a general legal practice that has been that general legal principle of international law which recognize the foreign proceedings. Thus, as the UN Citral is not applicable in the instant case, as the country has not ratified it, so here are 2 points: that UN Citral is ratified by the UK, and second, that due to the principle of comity, again it also plays a value, or we can say a recognition value on the UK to respect the judgment that will be passed today in form of consolidation, your lordship. Second, your lordship, it is consolidation is in the best interest of the stakeholders, because a standalone resolution is lot more attractive opportunity to resolution applicants as compared to a standalone resolution when these companies don't even have a lot of assets on their own. Furthermore, your lordship and your ladyship, it is submitted that consolidation would automatically result in distinguishing all the intercorporate claims, subsidiary equity ownership interest, or duplicative credit claims. So this leading to value maximization. So these 2 points are very of relevance. And if the question for jurisdiction of the power of NCLT is raised, for that we have Rule 11 of NCLT rules along with Section 65C. To pass such orders to meet the end of the justice and to deliberate on the questions of law arising out of insolvency proceedings. So this is in brief, your lordship and your ladyship. If there's any concern, the council would be happy to address.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an honor pleading before this bench. I request the co-counsel to take the screen now. Thank you.
May the council begin? Honorable members of the tribunal, good afternoon. This is the council appearing for the resolution professional Ravi Shankar, personal guarantor Deepak. As has already been argued, the issue of consolidation and preferential transaction. Therefore, the first council, that is I, will argue the issue of the maintainability of petition to initiate insolvency resolution process against FTSL, the maintainability of the petition against Deepak Dey, which is not, and third, that the assignment cum settlement agreement is invalid. Now, coming to the first issue, that the petition to commence CIRP against FTSL is maintainable. Your lordship and your ladyship, for any application to be admitted under Section 10, 3 requirements have to be fulfilled. First, the presence of debt, and it has become due, and it has also been defaulted. Second, the application has been filed by the corporate applicant. And third, a special resolution has been passed by the shareholders of the corporate debtor. If we look at the facts of the present case, then it is mentioned on page 2, para 2, that FTSL owed a debt of 32,000 crore to the lenders. And it is mentioned on page 8, para 3, that this debt has become due and it was being continuously defaulted. Therefore, the first requirement is met here. Coming to the second requirement, here, resolution professional has filed application as a corporate applicant. Because, your lordship, if we go...
Counsel, I will interrupt you. Why don't we look at the definition of corporate applicant?
Indeed, Your Lordship, the Council is coming to Section 5, subsection 5 of the IBC, which defines corporate applicant. Therein, it is clearly stated that a person can be under subclause C, it is clearly stated that a person can be a corporate applicant if he is managing the affairs and resources of the corporate debtor. And under subclause D, it is given that a person who has control and supervision over the financial affairs of the company can be a corporate applicant.
But Counsel, you are an individual, you are a resolution professional of the shareholder. So how do you fall in C?
Indeed. So, Your Lord, am I audible, Your Lordship?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are audible.
Thank you. So, Your Lordship, because once the CIRP of the corporate debtor commences and the resolution professional is appointed under Section 22 of the IBC, then under Section 25 of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, he has the control and custody of the assets of the company. So here, resolution professional Ravi Shankar has the control over the assets and assets of FIL. Now, if we go,
does the control over shares means control over the affairs of the subsidiary company?
Indeed, not, Your Ladyship. It is clearly mentioned in Section 18 that control of assets means the shares of the parent company in the subsidiary company, but the explanation says that the resolution professional cannot control the assets of the subsidiary. But if your Lordship and Ladyship may refer to Section 28 and the subclause J, then there it is written that the committee of creditor, that with the prior approval of the committee of creditor, the management of the subsidiary company can be changed. And here by the resolution of the committee of creditor and it is given on last para of page 8, that upon the resolution, Mr. Ravi Shankar was managing the affairs of FTSL. Therefore, he squarely falls under the subclause C of Section 5, subsection 5. Also, because...
No, sorry, one second. This resolution that you're talking about, what is this resolution? What does it say?
The resolution which is mentioned on last para of page 8 says that the committee of creditor has directed Mr. Ravi Shankar to take the charge of FTSL.
No, they don't have a board of directors. Under Companies Act, who manages the affairs of the company? Is it the resolution professional of the parent company, or is it the board of directors?
Your Ladyship, it is the board of the directors. But because...
So has he changed the board of directors? Has he changed the board of directors?
Your Ladyship, the board of directors has not been changed, but under Section 28 subclause J, because the committee of creditors has the authority by resolution to change the management of the subsidiary, so the management of the being changed. Moreover, Your Ladyship, under Section 5, subsection 5 and subclause D, a corporate applicant can be a person who has control over the financial affairs. And here, by virtue of FIL controlling 99.99% shares of FTSL, therefore, and since FIL is in CIRP, therefore, resolution professional has control over the financial affairs.
And Counsel, you're confusing two issues. I'm a little confused. At one point, you are saying because it's a 99% shareholder, it controls the financial affairs automatically, which according to me is not correct. At least just because you're controlling 99%, can you factually control the financial affairs of the company? And the second thing is, this is different from what you're talking about under Section 28. Now, under Section 28, you said that the corporate debtors COC has passed a resolution that they will control another company. But are they doing it? Have they actually changed the board? You are saying they haven't changed the board. So if the company is operating through the board, how is the resolution professional exercising control?
And sorry, I will add another point. 28 actually goes against you, Counsel. 28 says the resolution professional can change the management of the subsidiary by a resolution, thereby self-implying that the resolution professional was not in management.
Your Lordship,
yes. Go on.
Coming to the question of your lordship first, your lordship, here the council is stressing upon the fact that the management has been changed. It is not saying that the board of directors has been changed. And alternatively, also the council is trying to argue that here because FIL is a wholly owned subsidiary of FIL, therefore FIL had a major influence and it controlled majority of the financial decisions of the FTSL, and the authority and the council is deriving this from section 180 of the Companies Act, where it is said that the board of directors of the subsidiary of the company has to take approval upon matters from the shareholders of the company. Now coming to the
Council, I'm
question
glad.
of your ladyship,
Council, just one second. I'm glad you are referring to the Companies Act. Let's look at the definition of managing directors, right? In the
Indeed.
Companies Act. That says that is the director who, by virtue of resolution, is entrusted with substantial power of management. So it is very clear that what is being referred to in C is somebody who is akin to a managing director, not a shareholder. In one swipe of your hand, council, you have wiped away 200 years of jurisprudence of separate corporate personality. Just because I'm a shareholder, does it mean I'm entitled to take decisions in respect of the company? Does it mean I'm entitled to control their asset? Does it mean I'm entitled to control their financial affairs? Do you mean to say board of directors have no duty towards the shareholders and the company itself and promote the best interest of FTSL anymore, and it is the shareholder which has taken over? It is completely contrary to your own co-counsel's argument, who said that during the financial stress, the duty of the director was to creditors. So who are you and why are you here?
Indeed, your lordship. First of all, your lordship, here the council thinks that it is pertinent to bring out the fact that here, in fact, the board of directors of FTSL is not objecting to the CIRP application. And second,
that is irrelevant. That is irrelevant. You have to satisfy us that you are a corporate applicant under Section 10. That is the first issue.
Indeed.
Correct. I mean, if they are so happy about it, let them file an application. Then we'll see whether that is maintainable or not. First, you have to satisfy us on maintainability of this.
Indeed, your ladyship. Here the council is trying to prove that Resolution Professional is a valid corporate applicant, and it is not necessary that only a director can be a corporate applicant. Any person who falls within Section 5 of Section 5 can be a corporate applicant. And here, Resolution Professional, by virtue of controlling the almost the shares of the FTSL, has an enormous influence and enormous control and supervision over the financial affairs. Is this answers the query of both the judges?
It does. Okay, let's move to the next issue.
Indeed. Also, Lord, adding just one point here, the council would like to add that under Section 10, the NCLT's authority is just see that whether all the criteria of Section 10 are being met or not. And if the application is complete, it has to admit the application. Further,
council, you can move to the next. I think you've already exceeded your time, so you can move to the next topic.
Okay. So coming to the next issue, which is that the assignment cum settlement agreement here is not valid, and it is hit by Section 66 of the code. Now, under Section 66, subsection 1, the primary element is of income.
Council, sorry. I think we have heard the assignment issue from your co-counsel. Why don't you address us on the Deepak Dev issue? I think that is currently completely unaddressed. I think she has gone away again.
Apologies, judges, but it seems that there has been yet another connectivity issue.
Okay, I think her Wi-Fi is a bit wobbly. I think that's what it is.
Yes, we have currently stopped the time, and I guess we can allow for a while for her to join back.
Yeah, sure.
To organizing committee, should we move on? Okay, she's back. Okay.
Sorry for the interruption. So I sensed that honorable judge was asking some question.
No, I was telling you to actually move to the Deepak Dev issue because I think we have heard about the assignment issue from your co-counsel.
As the honorable tribunal wishes. So coming to the issue that the petition to initiate insolvency resolution process against Deepak Dev is not maintainable on the grounds of jurisdiction and merits. So if your lordship may refer, and if the honorable tribunal may refer to section 179 of the IBC, then the adjudicating authority in relation to the insolvency matters of individuals is the debt recovery tribunal, and it is the debt recovery tribunal, and it is not the National Company Law Tribunal. And this
Counsel,
is further strengthened by.
Counsel, why don't you read 60(1)?
Sorry, there was some network issue.
Can you read 60?
May your lordship.
Yeah, can you read section 60(1)?
Section 60, indeed, your lordship. So section 60 subsection 1 states that the adjudicating authority for corporate debtors and personal guarantors is the NCLT, but therein then it is qualified by the non-obstante clause under section 60 subsection 2. And a non-obstante clause.
No, subsection 2 says without prejudice. Notwithstanding is there, but it is also without prejudice. So why are you saying we don't have? Does 60(1) not give us jurisdiction?
Indeed, not your lordship, because here 60 subsection 1 and 60 subsection 2 in this case have to be harmoniously interpreted.
Why is that? It says without prejudice. What is the meaning of without?
But it has all. Without prejudice means without affecting the effectiveness of the previous foregoing section.
Correct. That means 60(1) should be read standalone.
Your lordship, but section 60 subsection 2 also mentions the non-obstante clause. And so it is a very well-established law.
Are you ignoring without prejudice?
Indeed, not your lordship. Here, indeed, legislative. Indeed, not your lordship. Here, the legislative intention has to be given effect. And if we see the overall code, then the legislature has separately introduced section 179. So the intent is that only.
What are you relying on for legislative intent for this?
May your lordship please repeat
then
your question?
Tell me, what is the principle of statutory interpretation? If the statute is clear, do we need to go back in the intent and all of this? You tell me which part of 60(1) is unclear for which we should refer to legislative intent.
And how do I even refer to intent? I don't understand. I was not part of the parliamentary committee debate. So how are you saying that this was the intent? How do we know the intent?
So what the council has sensed due to some network network disconnection, that your lordship are asking, your lordship and ladyship are asking that how the council has derived that this is the legislative intent, if the council is correct.
Yes, and the second question is, the first principle of legislative interpretation is that if the statute is clear, there is no need to go back to look into legislative intent or whatever it is. So is there any ambiguity you are pointing out, counsel? I think again she has dropped off.
Judges, we deeply regret these unfortunate, repeatedly connective issues, and we are trying to contact her to see if there could be a more better solution for this.
Your Lordship, we are really sorry for all the inconvenience that have been caused to the bench. Actually, the place where she resides, there's a lot of connectivity issue, and she has changed 3 places, 3 locations, and even then there's a connectivity issue which has been happening since the first round, and she has tried different locations as well, different connections as well. And there's a lot of issues. We're really sorry. We deeply regret it.
no problem.
Should we complete speaker 1? How much time is there for speaker 1?
Ma'am,
she here
5
now?
minutes are left for speaker 1. She has not yet connected back.
Oh, she's not connected. Oh, I thought Yogita.
No, Yogita is not on. I don't see her on the screen. Okay, Pooja and Dr. Sahu, if we are okay, then we should move to the next team. When she joins back, then we can come back to these issues.
I think so.
So, organization committee, can you ask the other team to start now? They can start with they can first do a response to the issues Divya had argued, so that by then Yogita can join.
Definitely, judges. We'd request the respondent team to decide which speaker would then want to go first, and we'll start the time accordingly.
Your Lordships, I would be going first. My name is Vishnu. I was initially the speaker 1 as well. I'll be taking 19 minutes of the Honorable Tribunal's time. If I may proceed.
Yes.
Much obliged. Your Lordship, I will be arguing the main matters of these following issues. Firstly, whether the consolidation application is indeed applicable in the instant matter, and secondly, whether the assignment cum settlement agreement amounts to an avoidable transaction. Your Lordship, this issue will be dealt with in both on behalf of SPL and on behalf of Mr. James McNulty, the English administrator. Lordship, further, I will also be briefly touching on the issue of the CIRP commencement under Section 10 of FTSL. Lordship, firstly, I would like to proceed with my arguments on behalf of SPL and Mr. James McNulty on the issue pertaining to avoidable transaction, Your Lordship. Lordship, in this instant matter, I will be arguing this in a twofold manner, Your Lordship. First, I will be proving to you that the transaction falls within the exception of ordinary course of business, and secondly, that the transaction is not fraudulent in nature. And Your Lordship, on behalf of Mr. James, I would also be putting forward that there is no reasoned and informed opinion based on which the transaction has been considered avoidable, Your Lordship.
But
Lordship,
counsel, one preliminary question. Why are you appearing on behalf of Mr. McNulty? What does he know about this transaction?
Much obliged, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, in this instant matter, we are appearing in behalf of Mr. James McNulty because of the fact that the avoidable transaction is also challenging the amount paid by FGE towards SPL as a part of the avoidable transaction, Your Lordship. Much obliged, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, firstly, we are contending that it is within the course of ordinary scope of business where there's a distinction drawn between preferential transaction and a mere priority transaction, Your Lordship. In the instant matter, the nature of the creditors is such that it is a priority transaction to ensure that the company keeps as a going concern, Your Lordship. Lordship, it should be noted by the Honorable Tribunal that electricity is an essential commodity. Therefore, it is important for the company to ensure it goes as a going concern. However, Your Lordship, our learned counsels on the opposition submitted that the fiduciary duty of the company is to protect the creditors. Your Lordship, there is no better way to protect the interests of the creditors than to ensure that the company is staying as a going concern. Your Lordship, if the payment was not made within due course, electricity supply would have been cut, and this would have caused prejudice to the interests of the creditors.
The counsel on the other side was arguing that it was not really required. Couldn't you, the government was not pressing for any oil or etc. Shouldn't you have taken shouldn't the company have taken a conscious call and decision whether they really want to make this payment or not? And couldn't you get electricity from some other sources?
Indeed, Your Ladyship. Your Ladyship, in this instant matter, it is very important to note that even though there were no specific requirements of oil, we do not know when such requirements actually come into picture, Your Ladyship. And as already contended, it is an essential commodity. There should always be we should always see the possibility of hope, and therefore, in the best interest of the company, Your Ladyship, it was essential to do this, Your Ladyship.
You are saying that there was no need for an electricity. There was no need for an electricity, but you thought that it may be required 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line, and therefore you decided to pay it.
Indeed not, your ladyship. We are saying that there was a requirement to continue production of oil, your ladyship. And for that, electricity was always required. Though there was no requirement or immediate demand for oil, we never know when it might have come. Therefore, in the best interest, continuation of production of oil was essential. Your ladyship, it's also submitted that the priority order as per section 53 is not really affected by this transaction, your ladyship. Here we are contending that...
Counsel, what are you arguing? You are arguing 2 points. Are you saying it is not a preferential transaction, or are you saying it is a preferential transaction but it is an ordinary course of business? You can't argue both.
Your lordship, in the best judgment, even if your lordships consider the same as preferential, I would like to put forth that the difference can be taken. However, on the prima facie reading, we are arguing that it is not preferential in the first place to begin with, your lordship. Here we are contending that section 53, which provides a waterfall mechanism, does not prioritize these particular creditors as opposed to other creditors. Your lordships, if I may draw your attention to the case of Insara Tech versus Cardigan, it was clearly mentioned that the resolution professional has a duty to ensure continuous supply of an essential commodity, your lordship. Therefore, even if this payment was...
What is the relevance of this? This transaction was not undertaken by the resolution.
Much obliged, your lordship, but even then, your lordship, it is being put forward that even if this transaction was not made now, this money anyways would not have been under the ambit of the common pool of assets, your lordship.
One second. When did you turn NPA, counsel? When did your company turn NPA?
Much obliged, your lordship. Your lordship, though the company had turned into a non-performing asset on
30th September 2019.
Yes, your lordship. 30th September 2019.
That means you were not paying all the financial. That means
Indeed,
financial creditor who rank higher than operational creditor in the 53 were not paid. Almost 7 months after that, around such a valuable property, around 400 crore, you transfer it out. You did not feel the need to do it since 2018 till 2020. Now suddenly when the insolvency is about to commence, you feel the need to assign this. You didn't have cash. There is no justification. Other side says you had no justification to do this. Why did you not pay him earlier?
Your lordship, earlier it was in the best interest of the creditors and of the company to ensure that payment was actually made to the financial creditors. However, lordship, when this distress actually started, it was of the common observance that if supply of electricity itself is not there in the first place, when the company can't even produce oil, it can't make good the concerns which are raised by the other financial creditors, your lordship. Therefore, to ensure that sufficient...
No, counsel. Your default has started with this SPA, this company Sahasa Power, SPL. Since 2018, you have not paid. Now suddenly in April of 2020, what changed? It showed something was fishy on your side.
Your lordship, the default actually started 1 year after the power purchase agreement. Actually, after every year, the amount was due at the end of the year. Since the power purchase agreement was had begun in 2018, it was supposed to pay in 2019 and in the year 2020. Though the total...
Okay. Now answer a simple question. Does it alter the priority under 53 or not? Because he was an operator. How do you say that?
Your lordship, this is because under 53 is a last waterfall mechanism, but even before going to the 53, your lordship, 180 days of contention when the resolution professional has to look into this matter. During that time itself, the resolution professional is under the duty to ensure that
Counsel. This did not happen during the CIRP period. So if you are saying that essential supplies were done during CIRP, current dues had to be paid, etc., that's irrelevant, right? The transaction that you're talking about, the payment to this company, this power company, took place prior to CIRP. All dues which are prior to CIRP, you have to file your claims, you have to stand in the waterfall. Then why are you saying that it doesn't change the priority?
Your ladyship, even considering this fact that this priority has not been met with, we will be relying on our other argument where we are saying we are claiming the defense under the ordinary scope of business.
So are you giving up your argument?
Yes, I use
Indeed, not your ladyship, but to ensure that, due to the paucity of time, to ensure that we cover all the issues, we would like to request the court, the tribunal's permission to move on, your ladyship.
Okay, so now on your ordinary course of business, very quickly, I'm going to ask you just one question. Is there a history of you doing something like this earlier? Is that important for this discussion or not? Is there a history of? Yeah. So how do you say it is an ordinary course of business?
Much obliged. Your Lordship, when we look at ordinary course of business, what we need to see is the undistinguished common flow of business, which is present in this instant matter, where the objective of the company at large is being satisfied, your Lordship. That is what we are moving towards. Your Lordship, however, moving on to the side of James, it is submitted that for the requirement under application made by Ravi Shankar for section 66, it's a huge burden of proof on the resolution professional to prove both malified intention and to prove that it was a clear intent to defraud other creditors, which has not been fulfilled. Your Lordships and your Ladyships, a preliminary reading of their memorial suggests that the forensic audit will ensure and sufficiently provide proof of this malified intention. However, it should be noted by this honorable tribunal that Mr. Ravi Shankar did not have access to all the books of accounts of FGE and FTSL to conduct such forensic audit in the first place to begin with. Therefore, there is no reason or informed opinion based on which this assumption of this fraudulent transaction is placed, your Lordship and your Ladyship. Your Lordships and your Ladyships, it's also submitted that even in this instance, where this in arguendo, even if the honorable tribunals consider the same as an avoidable and fraudulent transaction, the same money, the whole transaction will be deemed to be void under section 43, and this amounts will go back to FGE. Your Lordships and Ladyships, since FGE has made the payment, the same 350 crores, the same 280 crores will lie in the common pool of assets of FGE, and the English administrator may dispose this as he deems fit upon application by the Indian RP with sufficient proof of debt to the English administrators, your Lordships and your Ladyship. With that, I would like to move on to the next issue on behalf of the English administrator, Mr. James McNulty. Much obliged. Your Lordships, I will be dealing with the discussion pertaining to whether consolidation of insolvency proceedings may be allowed. Your Lordship, I will be dealing with this issue in a threefold manner. Firstly, I'll be submitting that the tribunal does not have powers to lay down such procedures. Secondly, that the criteria for consolidation has not been met in this instant matter. And thirdly, that the separate entity approach should be followed. Your Lordships and your Ladyship, reliance for the first part of the argument will be placed on section 239 and section 240, which clearly says that the central government and the IBBI are vested with the rights to make rule and regulations on matters pertaining to IBC. Your Lordship, there is a requirement to amend multiple sections to accommodate for group insolvency proceedings in India. If I may quote your Honorable Lordship, your Lordship has in his submissions in the IBBI annual report has said that though India has not reached a state where consolidation is applicable, India is striving. India is on a journey, and it has started its path for ensuring consolidation. This suggests that it is still not equipped. Indeed, your Lordship.
Counsel, answer a short question for me. Why do we not have the inherent power to consolidate, as has been done by my learned brothers elsewhere in the NCLT benches, which are, by the way, binding on us?
Much obliged, your Lordship. Here, your Lordship, we would like to bring in this argument that even when inherent powers were actually exercised, CIRP was pending against most of the companies which actually were being called for consolidation. If you look at the case of video...
No, you are arguing on facts, Counsel. I am asking a very straight legal question. We will come to the merits.
Much obliged. Your Lordship,
do I have the inherent power? Does this bench have the inherent power to consolidate or not? Simple.
Your Lordship, on the first line of our argument, we are contending that this court does not have the inherent powers, because inherent powers, though we agree that the justice as a whole needs to be applied, Your Lordship, in this instant matter, there'll be a problem because of separation of powers as a whole. When the Honorable Tribunal
Counsel, are you saying that we have inherent powers but we should not exercise it in this case, or are you saying we don't have inherent powers?
Much obliged, Your Ladyship. Your Ladyship, the inherent powers need to be exercised in a manner as to not transgress into the powers of the central government and the IBBI, Your Ladyship. That is what we are contending.
Assuming I am not doing that, I would be okay to, I have the power to consolidate. Is that correct?
Much obliged, Your Ladyship, but in the instant matter, since the IBBI or the central government has not laid down sufficient procedures for consolidation, which is a right of them to do it, by laying down such ad hoc procedures, they won't be comity in various tribunal judgments, Your Ladyships. That is the problem. However, if your Ladyships are willing, if your Ladyship and your Lordship are willing to consolidate this matter, it is still submitted that the requirements for consolidation, which has been contended in various cases, has not been met, Your Ladyship. Your Ladyship, as per the case of Videocon, which was heavily used by our learned counsels on the opposing side, it has been sufficiently provided that consolidation will occur only on a fact-to-fact basis and not in every single case. Ladyship, the Videocon case also ensures the requirement of common creditors, which is not present in this instant matter. It also requires same objectives between the various companies, but it is clear that each company has a diverse business interest, where one deals with retail fashion, one deals with telecommunication, and the other is an is a completely different concept. Your Ladyship and your Lordships, it is also submitted that there is a lack of shared infrastructure. There's a lack of a common board and a common management, though there may be an instant of a single common director in each of these. All of them act in their separate powers, and there is no prima facie evidence of interdependence between these corporations or these companies. Therefore, the separate legal entity has to be upheld by the Honorable Tribunal, Your Lordships and Ladyships. Further, it is contended that as per the objective of the code itself, the best interest of the creditors need to be kept in mind, and here the creditors also include the creditors of FGE, who will be treated in a very unfair manner if consolidation is in fact agreed. Your Lordships and Ladyships, it should be noted by the Honorable Tribunal that FGE's loan amount is just a mere 10% of the total loan amount if we take the whole Fortuna Group into consideration. Therefore, even if consolidation occurs, if the COC meetings allow for voting, they'll have a very minor voting power. Their interest is not best dealt with, and the Gibbs rule will apply in this instant matter. Since the creditors have not, during the course of providing loan, since they were under the assumption that English laws will apply, since the company had incorporated in England, this should be noted by the honorable judges and ensure that we protect the interests of the creditors of FGE as well, and not merely the creditors of FTSL and FIL.
Why do we owe a duty to creditors of FG?
Much obliged, Your Lordships. Your Lordship, in this instant matter, it should be noted that the objective of the tribunal as a whole is to ensure that all creditors and all stakeholders are given due powers and due notice, Your Lordships. Therefore, FGE
am I under any kind of duty to take care of all the creditors of all the companies? And are you saying that the Gibbs rule does apply in India?
Your Ladyship, the Gibbs rule does have a persuasive say in this matter, and we request the court to keep in due regards that the tribunal should function in a matter where each creditor is given due regards, Your Ladyship.
But he is not a creditor. I'm not sure how you are saying. You are appearing in the insolvency of FIL and FTSL. You are a foreign creditor. You are a foreign insolvency professional. What duty? You are arguing that we should protect the foreign creditor for whom another statutory body dispute resolution mechanism exists.
Indeed, Your Lordship. If your Lordships allow us to ensure that the same proceedings are undertaken in the United Kingdoms and the same proceedings do not fall under this, we would indeed take care of the we would indeed ensure that the safety of the creditors are there, Your Lordship. Therefore, we are also contending in the course of the arguments by my co-counsel that the recognizability of English orders need to be upheld by this Honourable Tribunal, and the COMI, that is, the main interest lies with England, Your Lordship. Lordship, however, due to the paucity of time, I would like to briefly address the next issue pertaining to the commencement of CIRP, Section 10 CIRP proceedings of FTSL, Your Lordships and Ladyship. Much obliged. Your Lordships and Ladyship, though this matter has not been listed for hearing today, I would like to briefly touch upon the problems which we may face because of the arguments posed by our learned counsels on the opposition. Yeah. Your Lordships, it should be duly noted that when the matters were listed for hearing for today, the same matters were listed on 25/10/2020, whereas the COC authorized to file Section 10 petition on 10/11/2020 after the listings for this day was already done. Your Lordships, along with this, the key element of special resolution of 3/4 shareholders has not been met with in this instant matter. And Your Lordships and Ladyship, it should be duly noted that the resolution professional, Mr. Ravi Shankar, is a mere custodian of assets and not the owner of FTSL. Therefore, he doesn't have the same rights of a shareholder. Therefore, he can't merely exercise the rights of the shareholder by oppressing the minority shareholders, Your Lordships and Ladyship. Therefore, in this brief summary, I would like to conclude my arguments and call upon my co-counsel to deliver the rest of the issues. It's a pleasure arguing before this Honourable Tribunal. If Your Lordships and Ladyship have further questions, I would be happy to address them.
Thank you.
Much obliged.
Judges, that speaker.
Your Lordship, I am the co-counsel, but a
Listen.
quick question. Should the co-counsel on the opposition side go first, or should I proceed with my submissions?
I think you should proceed now. We'll come back to them.
Your Lordship, however, it is requested of you if the co-counsel on the opposition side would go first, because as a responding party, it would make our submissions much more easier had we heard them and what their arguments were.
All right. Okay. So Yogita can go, and Yogita, you will have Pooja, Dr. Rao, should we give them 3 minutes to wrap up the arguments?
Yeah, 3 to 4 minutes.
3 to 4 minutes. All right, Yogita.
Only Yogita is there from team 1 now, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Much obliged, and apology for the disconnection. Your Lordship, because before the disconnection, the Honourable Tribunal has expressed its concern that the court is very clear that the adjudicating authority should be NCLT. So briefly answering this,
Counsel, we had not made any decision. We were seeking your assistance in reaching a right conclusion on this.
Indeed, that's why the council is addressing the concerns which your Lordships put forth prior. And your Lordships also asked that how the council is deriving the intention of the legislature.
Yes.
Answering the first question, your Lordship, here because there is some contradiction between Section 60 subsection 1 and Section 60 subsection 2. Therefore, if we apply the rule of golden interpretation, then it says that whenever there arises some absurdity or hardship, then a harmonious construction should be done. So if we read Section 60 subsection 1 and Section 60 subsection 2 together, then it becomes clear that the adjudicating authority for personal guarantors will be NCLT only in the cases where the corporate insolvency resolution process is also pending before the NCLT. And here it is not the case. And your Lordship, intention can also be gathered from the preamble and overlooking the whole structure of the code too. So your Lordship, here the insolvency administration of FGE is pending in the Court of United Kingdom. Therefore, here it is not pending before NCLT, and this case cannot fall into the exception of Section 60, subsection 2. Is there any concern regarding this argument of the council?
Yes, there is. Mr. Dev is also so-called guarantor to FTSL, who is in insolvency. Why do we not have jurisdiction following that 60 bracket 2?
Your Lordship, the council understands the concern, but here Mr. Deepak Dev's letter of comfort cannot be construed as a guarantee. And there is a very, very clear case of United Breweries versus Karnataka Industrial Company. Your Lordship, there it is clearly stated that a contract of guarantee has to be very clear from the language. And Mr. Deepak Dev, if Your Lordship may refer to page 3, where this letter of comfort is given, then the Deepak Dev is also saying Deepak Dev is just assuring the lenders that the FTSL would be able to meet its liabilities. Here, Deepak Dev has not said anything or has not.
How will he assure? How will he assure that, council? Doesn't it mean that if he says that he is going to assure, he will do everything he can, including making a payment?
Sorry, Your Ladyship, may you please repeat your question?
My question is, how is it going to assure? According to you, how will he assure? Will he not assure by making payment?
Your Ladyship, here, first of all, it is very important to understand that letter of comforts are not as such legally binding, and they are only binding if they, and for their legal binding, there is a very high threshold. So here, because it is also a general corporate practice too, as is also given in the moot proposition, that in line with the general practice, there is a norm of assuring the lenders that yes, the company will be able to meet its obligation. Because when someone like Deepak Dev, who is also the promoter, so when someone like promoter or director says so the creditors really get assured that yes, the company has some financial standing and it will be. Also, Your Ladyship, in the same United Breweries Limited versus Karnataka Industrial Investment, it was very clearly written, and to produce it ad verbum, the Karnataka High Court said that that letter of comfort is a document that indicates one party's intention to try to ensure that another party's compliance with the terms of financial transaction, but it is without guaranteeing the performance in the event of default. And Mr. Deepak Dev hasn't clearly stated that in the event of default by FTSL, Mr. Deepak Dev will be liable. But yes, the counsel for the Deepak Dev is not contesting the guarantee regarding FGE. Mr. Deepak Dev has given guarantee FGE, but because FGE's insolvency liquidation is happening in England, therefore, and it is not before NCLT, therefore, the jurisdiction of NCLT cannot be here in the present matter. Is there any concern which the council may address here? May the council proceed to the merits?
You have 1 minute to wrap up now. Your time is anyway up.
Indeed. So here, Your Lordship, proceeding to the merits. Now, it is a very clear case of Piramal Enterprises, Vishnu Kumar Agarwal versus Piramal Enterprises, that simultaneous proceedings regarding the same debt by same financial creditor cannot be filed against the personal guarantor, cannot be filed against the guarantor and the corporate debtor. So, Your Lord, so honorable members of the tribunal.
Hasn't Piramal been distinguished now, counsel?
Your Lordship, it has been distinguished by the NCLT, but because NCLAT is a superior authority, so it has a very influential value over the NCLT.
No, counsel. I think it has been distinguished by NCLT itself.
Correct. Have you been following the judgment, counsel? They have clearly made a distinction. NCLAT itself has made a distinction and has allowed a simultaneous proceeding.
Your Ladyship, but it has not clearly laid down the law regarding that. So here, because Piramal case is pending before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court is the final authority to give any decision regarding this, and it still has a persuasive value. Now moving to the next leg of the argument, here because the debt of FGE still hasn't crystallized in the way that FGE is undergoing insolvency liquidation, and thereupon and the final liability, that how much FGE will pay, will finally be determined by the resolution plans which will be arrived at. And any change in the liability of FGE will also affect the obligations of Deepak Dev too. So till then, petition against Deepak Dev should not be admitted. May the council, is there any concern by the Honorable Tribunal? May the council very quickly wrap up its argument of the fraudulent transaction issue?
I think your time is over. 30 seconds more.
Your Lordship, the council will wrap its argument in brevity of the fine.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Much obliged. So, Your Lordship, here in the fraudulent transaction, the most prominent element is intent. Now, intent is something which is not tangible, and it has to be inferred from the facts and circumstances. And here, the council is not solely relying on the forensic audit report. Here, the council is seeing forensic audit report in light of the facts and circumstances. Now, it is important to see the timing of the assignment cum settlement agreement. So, it was entered into at a time when the directors of the company very clearly knew that there is no reasonable prospect of avoiding the CIRP. And at that time, their first and foremost responsibility was towards the creditors over the interest of the corporate debtor. And the weak financial condition is also reflected by the NPAs which the bank has declared. And also here the general economic environment, that it has so much liability, like 43,000 crores. Therefore, Your Lordship, here the director, it can be inferred that the directors sense that now their control from the company is going to be loose, and the company will definitely undergo CIRP, which it goes just after 3 months from the conclusion of the assignment cum settlement agreement. So to siphon off the funds, they transfer 400 crores to SPL. Now, had this 400 crore been transferred to FIL, then it could have been used to pay the obligations of the financial creditor. Also here, the forensic audit report has so much relevance because first, it has been prepared by an independent and highly forensic audit report in general are prepared by a very highly qualified and impartial auditor. And now auditor or resolution professional does not have any vested interest in the case. Therefore, also under Section 424 of the Companies Act 2, the NCLT has the authority to place reliance on the reports of these evidences. Is there any concern regarding? Much obliged. Thank you.
Your Lordship, am I audible to you?
Yes, you are audible, but we can't see you. I don't know who is speaking.
Your Lordship, I'm trying to connect. Is it coming now, sir? Your Lordship, apologies.
No.
That's Anushka, right?
Yes, Your Ladyship. That's Anushka. Is my video visible now?
I'm sorry, but the video is not visible. If there are still connectivity issues, you may continue without the video on.
Yeah, because there's a message in the chat box which says that she's having connection issues and we can excuse her from switching on the video.
Your Ladyship, am I visible now?
Yes.
Yes, the video is coming.
Yes.
All right. Council seeks permission to approach the bench. Much obliged, Your Ladyship. Council seeks permission to address the issue on behalf of HSBC and others firstly. The issue at hand pertains to whether personal guarantee given by Mr. Deepak Dev can be invoked by the foreign banks. This issue shall be dealt with in a twofold manner. The first fold will elucidate the jurisdiction of the Honorable Tribunal in this matter. Second fold will deal with whether with respect to the contention of the learned opposition with regards to simultaneous proceedings against corporate debtor and the personal guarantee wherein they cited the Vishnu Kumar Piramal judgment. Moving on to the first fold of the Council on behalf of HSBC and others have approached the Honorable Tribunal under Section 95 read with Section 60 subsection 2. Now, a primary question that will come to the mind of the Honorable benches, the prerequisite under Section 60 subsection 2 is the pendency of a sub proceeding against the corporate debtor. It is submitted in this regard that the Honorable Tribunal may turn its attention to Section 60 subsection 5C, which says that any question of facts or a question of priority or a question of law in relation to or arising out of the CIRB proceedings of a corporate debtor may also be entertained at that particular national company or tribunal. Now, it must be noted, now the facts must be relied on. The Atul Dev Trust is the 55% shareholder of FIL. Now, Atul Dev Trust is a discretionary trust. A discretionary trust under the Indian trust as a kind of a trust wherein the trustee has sole discretion as to how he wants to distribute the trust property amongst the beneficiaries. Now, it must be noted by the Honorable Tribunal that that under the contract of guarantee or the pledge agreement that Mr. Deepak Dev has executed in favor of HSBC and the other banks, he has pledged his entire stake in Quest Holding LLP. Now, the reason why we have approached this Honorable Tribunal is because since FIL is already in insolvency, in case their insolvency does not accrue benefits and they go into liquidation, it is very possible that any share that that Atul Dev Trust holds in FIL may come to zero value, because they, after distribution of monies amongst the creditors, they might not have any value, which indirectly affects any interest
Counsel.
that HSBC. Yes, Your Lordship.
Two things. One is you can switch on your camera. I think your voice was better without the camera.
All right, Your Lordship.
That's number one. Number two, can you read the definition of personal guarantor?
Indeed, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, under Rule 3E, or Regulation 3 of the Personal Guarantor Regulation, the code only gets triggered when the guarantor is the personal guarantor to a corporate debtor.
No,
And we
Counsel.
have
Counsel, read section 5 bracket 22.
all right, Your Lordship. Just a second. Yes, Your Lordship. A personal guarantor under Section 5 has been defined as an individual who is a surety in a contract of guarantee to a corporate debtor.
Okay, now what is the definition of corporate debtor?
A corporate debtor under Section 3, subsection 8 has been defined as a person to whom who owes debt to another person. However, the definition of person under Section 3, subsection 7 is with respect to the definition as given under the Companies Act, Section 2, subsection 20.
Correct. So
it does not include.
Corporate person definition is, sorry, who are you appearing for? You're appearing for HSBC.
Yes, indeed. Your Lordship, I understand the question you're getting at, whether FGE can be considered as a corporate debtor under the purview of the IBC with respect to an application being filed for personal guarantee to corporate debtor. To answer this question, the Council turned the Honorable Tribunal's attention to Section 60, subsection 5C, which says that any question of facts related or in connection with the CIRP of the corporate debtor can be also entertained at that particular NCLT. Now, the fact that because of the intricate holding structure of both FG and FIL, when Atul Dev Trust is the common link, in case FIL, since the CIRP for FIL has already been started, any result of it that may affect Quest Holding LLP by virtue of Atul Dev Trust will have an effect on the interest that my clients will have in the same regard.
Are you saying that anything that affects the Atul Dev Trust will give a jurisdiction to this NCLT to proceed against the personal guarantor?
Your Lordship, considering the fact that the trust property of Atul Dev Trust is the shares held in FIL, and Quest Holding LLP being a beneficiary, so indirectly it is a shareholder of FIL. It may affect the interest that my clients HSBC and the other banks have in the estate of Mr. Deepak Dev. Second, it also must be noted on the point of question of facts that Mr. Deepak Dev has also executed a letter of comfort in favor of FTSL, and a Section 10 petition has also been filed with respect to FTSL. Now, if the Section 10 petition gets accepted, the lenders of FTSL also have a right against Mr. Deepak Dev in his capacity of personal guarantee to corporate debtor.
But how do you explain the judgment which has been cited by the other side?
Your Lordship, with respect
how
to...
How is the letter of comfort the same as the guarantee? Please.
If Your Lordship may turn its attention to page 3 of the moot proposition, they are trying to mislead the bench by saying that the letter of comfort is just an assurance when the word guarantee is clearly given in the wordings of the letter of comfort. If I may read it out for the convenience of the Honorable Tribunal. A letter is provided for the comfort of lenders, and Mr. Deepak Dev hereby guarantees that FTSL would be able to meet its repayment obligations at all times. Now, the understanding of the learned opposition on the other side is dividing itself.
One second, Counsel. What is a contract of under Indian Contract Act?
Much obliged, Your Lordship. A contract of guarantee is a contract to perform the promise or discharge the liability of a third person in case of default, which is being met with regards to the letter of comfort,
you read out that it is a promise to discharge the debt. Here it is a promise to, it is a keep well undertaking. It is saying that I will ensure that he meets his obligation. Mr. Dev has not obligated himself to discharge the obligation.
Your Lordship, however...
Secondly, there is a second part also. That guarantee needs to be a tripartite contract. This is just a letter given to the lender.
Yes, Your Lordship. However, in a financial commercial transaction of an amount up to of such large amounts, it's general practice that banks will lend such a huge amount based on any letter of comfort or some sort of a security that is provided by the third party.
If the intention was to provide a security or a guarantee, the letter would have said that. The letter would have said that I will pay in case FTSL defaults. Why doesn't it say that?
Much appreciated, Your Lordship, but it must be noted that in the facts at hand, even with respect to the personal guarantee that was provided to the lenders of FG, the collateral security has been named as a pledge agreement, and the learned opposition on the other end never contested the fact that even that was a personal guarantee or not. Therefore, considering the way these transactions have occurred and the way of executing or giving some sort of comfort to the lenders, it can be derived that in this case, a letter of comfort must indeed be treated as a contract of guarantee. Regardless of that, it also must be noted, even if the letter of comfort is not treated as a contract of guarantee, even then the lenders of FTSL do have a right of action against the Mr. Deepak Dev. Therefore, it may happen that they proceed and the court may pass an order preventing Mr. Deepak Dev from alienating his properties and assets, which will be prejudicial to the interest of the creditors of FG, that is my clients HSBC and other banks. Furthermore, Mr. Deepak Dev having resided in India, it will be highly inconvenient for us to enforce that particular interest or right of action that we do hold from the United Kingdoms. If the Honorable Tribunal is satisfied with this submission, Counsel seeks permission to move on to the second fold of the submission, wherein the learned opposition on the opposite end have extensively relied on the case of Vishnu Kumar Piramal Enterprises case. It must be noted by the Honorable Tribunal that coextensiveness of liability is a hallmark of a contract of guarantee, as was also observed in the case of SBI versus Ramakrishnan by the Supreme Court. Furthermore, in the case of SBI versus Athena Energy Ventures, under para 19 and para 20, it has been clearly laid out, the position of law has been again re-established, that the right that a creditor may have to initiate action against a guarantor cannot be hampered merely because a proceeding or an action has not been taken against the principal borrower. Furthermore, even if we go by the logic, assuming and not conceding that Vishnu Kumar Enterprise case is applicable, the facts of the case are not pertinent to the facts at hand. In that case, the court considered the rule of double dip, wherein two simultaneous claims were filed against two corporate guarantors. The court in that case considered the concept of joint liability, wherein two proceedings for the same debt, the same amount, were instituted in the same proceeding. In this case, HSBC has registered the claim against the principal borrower, that is FG, in the United Kingdom, and there is no other proceeding pending against Mr. Deepak Dev with regards to FG or any other guarantor at the Honorable Tribunal or any other Indian proceeding for that matter. Keeping that in mind, the right of action that the foreign creditors here may have cannot be prejudiced. If the Honorable Tribunal is satisfied with this submission, Council seeks permission to move on to the issue of cross-border insolvency with regards to whether the administration order passed by the United Kingdoms could be recognized, or how the center of main interest with regards to FG is determined, because that
Why
will
is that
affect.
relevant? Why is that relevant for us?
It is relevant, Your Lordship, because the learned counsel on the opposition side are claiming that because of them being a part of the Fortuna group of companies, they somehow should be the insolvency proceeding with regards to FG should be conducted in India. So therefore, the topic or the issue of center of main interest in determination of as to where.
So who are you representing, counsel?
Your Lordship, now I'm moving on to submissions on behalf of Mr. James McNulty. So, yes, indeed, Your Lordship. If the Honorable Tribunal permits, I shall move on to the submission.
Okay, but explain to me.
Yes,
we have
Your
not
Lordship.
adopted We have not adopted UNCITRAL. Whatever the
Indeed,
COMI
Your
is,
Lordship.
I'm willing to concede that the COMI of FGE is also in India. But what difference does it make to us?
Your Lordship, the COMI of FG is not in India, which is what is going to be submitted in the arguments.
No, Counsel, I want you to address. I'm saying you assume that COMI is in India. Now, what difference does it make to the consolidation request? Let's assume that. Are you not saying that the decisions are being taken in India? Are you not saying that the entire financing structure is because of the goodwill of the Fortuna Group? Are
Your
you not
Lordship,
saying? Yeah.
Indeed not, Your Lordship, that will be contested. Now, since the question has already been raised, I shall jump into the submissions. It must be noted that the center of main interest is defined as the place from where the debtor conducts the administration of his interest on a regular basis, and therefore is ascertainable by third parties. There are two things to be noticed from this definition. Firstly, administration of interest on a regular basis, and secondly, being ascertainable by third parties. Now, the facts at hand must be considered, Your Lordship. It must be noted that none of the assets or the creditors.
I think what my learned brother is getting at is that forget the COMI argument. Let's assume COMI is in India.
All right, Your Lordship.
Now tell us whether we can consolidate or not.
Your Lordship, the Honorable Tribunal may still not consolidate the said applications because even if precedence is borrowed from the Videocon case, which talks about group insolvency, there were certain tests that were laid down with regards to common liability, common assets, commonality in shareholders, and etc. etc. Now, I shall be telling as to how these tests are not even satisfied. Firstly, in the Videocon case, it was noted that a common rupee facility agreement was extended to 13 of the companies. In this regard, FG, FIL, and FTSL do not have any commonality in liability, firstly. Secondly, it must be noted that there is no commonality of creditors in this regard because FG's creditors are European banks and they are all based in Europe. Thirdly, there is no commonality of assets also because it's clearly given on page 3 of the Moot proposition that all the FG's expanded its business through brand acquisition strategies, but however, all these brands were again situated in Europe. Therefore, even if we say that COMI is to be for an instance in India, even then the test as laid down in the Videocon case cannot be fulfilled. Further on, as it is contended before the Honorable Tribunal that even command and control of FG is not lying in India, and the registered office assumption must thus be adopted. The reason why the council is putting forward if the council could just get 2 minutes to sum up the submission. Much obliged, Your Lordship. Now, reliance is placed on the case of SBI versus Jet Airways, even and the NCLAT appeal of the same case, which is Jet Airways versus SBI. But in both cases, the court has observed the main rationale that the court observed is, even if we were to recognize the Dutch proceedings, even in that case, since the registered office of the company in question was in India, they substantiated their rationale for holding that the Indian proceedings must be the ones handling the main proceeding. Therefore, even India, in essence, is supporting the registered office assumption, as is also given in the Unicitral model law, wherein even though it's not adopted in India, but it still has persuasive value, and it says that unless it has been sufficiently rebutted by the learned opposition on the opposite side, the assumption will still stand that the registered office has to be regarded as the center of main interest. For this purpose, again, another case is submitted before this honorable tribunal, available on page 126 of the compendium that is given on the chat box with regards to INRE Eurofort, wherein similar facts were involved, wherein one proceeding was started in Italy of the parent company, and the other proceeding was started in Ireland of the registered office of the subsidiary. Now, the question before the court in this regard was whether the member state was bound to determine the COMI based on the registered office. The court herein applied the registered office assumption, as the same was supported by evidence as is there in this case. Furthermore, the court also observed, regardless of the economic choices of the parent of the subsidiary being controlled by the parent company A, or the parent company, say for example, having the power to even appoint directors, or thirdly, that the parent company is the majority shareholder. Even regardless of that, even then registered office has to be regarded as the center of main interest of the company. Therefore, in light of INRE Eurofort's case, SBI versus Jet Airways case, and the appeal of the Jet Airways case, it can be reasonably concluded that the COMI indeed lies in the United Kingdom, which clearly, and secondly, as also submitted by my co-counsel, the fact that there is no commonality, or there is no link between FG and FIL, there is no point of tampering with the proceedings that are ongoing in the UK, and they should be left alone. Furthermore, it also must be noted that it is prejudicial to the interest of the creditors, the main creditors of FG, which is a separate legal entity, because while they were giving the loans to FG, while they gave the loans, considering the formidable reputation of Fortuna Group, they never thought that in case the parent company goes into insolvency, they will have to be dragged in Indian proceedings. It is highly inconvenient. Furthermore, they did not give the loans based on the formidable reputation of FIL. They gave it on the formidable reputation of the group of companies. Therefore, lastly, it is submitted that in light of no common assets, no common creditors, no common liability, parallel proceedings will just hinder the process of insolvency, and the same should not be permitted, as a foreign company cannot even be treated as a corporate debtor under the purview of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Additionally, again, it is lastly submitted that the learned opposition have tried to mislead the bench by saying that FG's default is connected to FI's default. It must be noted here that FG's default is because of independent reasons, which is given as externalities in the moot proposition. Secondly, FTSL's default again has started in the year 2020, and FIL's default started because of production of electronic vehicles. That's why there is no common connection between any of this, and therefore they cannot be treated as one single entity, and therefore the place of administration should thus be held for FG as United Kingdoms. Therefore, if the Honorable Tribunal has no further question, the Council on behalf of Mr. James McNulty requests permission to move on to prayers.
Prayers are well understood. I think you can wrap up.
Thank you, Your Lordship. On behalf of my co-counsel and I shall express my gratitude and my pleasure at arguing before this Honorable Tribunal. I rest my case.
Thank you.
May the council proceed with the rebuttals, Your Lordships and Your Ladyship?
Yes. Dr. Sahu, Pooja,
Yeah.
two minutes for rebuttal, right?
We'll just reserve a minute or two only. Yes, Your Lordship.
2 minutes for each team.
We'll keep it very crisp.
Yes. Okay. Go.
Judges, the teams have reserved only 1 minute for their rebuttals. So,
Okay,
if
that's fine. 1 minute it
That's
is.
1 minute.
thank you, sir.
Your Lordship, first, that essential Section 30 of CIRP regulations are restricted to those items which are not the direct output of the direct input of the output that has been given. A beautiful illustration in the same regulation that water used for drinking and sanitation is an essential good, but not when used for hydroelectricity power. Second rebuttal would be, Your Lordship, the minor injury caused because of the reduction in decision making ought not to be the criteria to avoid the consolidation, as held in the case of re-affiliated foods. Third, difference in facts does not imply that the ratio could not be implied. Fourth, and last, we didn't raise the question of COMI because was not required. However, as it has been raised by the respondents, so answering to it, COMI would always be in New Delhi because that is the place of central administration, as held in the case of Eurofoods. And FGE is a mere establishment under Article 2F of UN Central Model on Cross-Border Insolvency. That will be all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any rebuttals from the respondents?
Those are not specific rebuttals. We would like to address a few. One question raised where it was asked that what happens if COMI is in fact presumed to be in India. We would just like to point out that if COMI is in fact in India, the waterfall mechanism in the United Kingdoms, which would have otherwise applied, that is the Lehman's waterfall case, which says that preference should be treated as per that case, will completely be disregarded and Section 53 will apply, and that will not be in the best interest of the creditors of FGE, Your Lordships. That is why it is being contended in the first place that because of the registered office presumption, that we are contending that the center of main interest actually does lie in the United Kingdoms. Lordship, though it was submitted in their rebuttals that the center of main interest does not lie there, due to the fact that the directors were located in India, we again stress upon the relevance of the registered office approach, which we highlighted before. Your Lordships and Ladyship would also like to highlight the important duty of burden of proof placed on the resolution professional, which is not met in the incident matter, and this should indeed be a part when the decision is being made by the Honourable Tribunal. Lordship, with that, we are very proud to argue before this Honourable Tribunal. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so Chiranjeev, how do we do this? Will the teams go out now or we stay here?
Everyone. So the teams, I would request all the teams and all the spectators to leave this room so that the judges may privately consult and reach the decision.
With the permission of the OC and the judges, can we get a brief feedback after the judgment, or do we join back again?
If it's okay with the judges, can you provide us more feedback right now and can we do this after the it's okay with the judges? If that's okay with our judges also, if they are like to provide us more feedback right now so they can deliberate later.
I think one of us let Mr.